So let's talk about the Taiwan Shield tonight. Is it the latest scam on the island? Previously, I saw Taiwan's Shi Lao and his editor RJ discussing whether Taiwan should introduce Israel's Iron Dome air defense system. They think the Iron Dome system is mainly for intercepting rockets. They believe Taiwan's existing air defense missiles are too expensive, and using them to intercept our long-range rocket artillery would be too costly and unsustainable. So, they think the Iron Dome is very suitable for intercepting rockets. First, let's take a look at what the Iron Dome actually is. The Iron Dome uses the Tamir interceptor missile. We can see that the weight of this missile itself is not very large. It's only about 90 kilograms. What does 90 kilograms mean? Well, for example, our country's PL-10 air-to-air missile already weighs over 100 kilograms. So the Tamir air defense missile is even lighter than our PL-10 air-to-air missile. Moreover, we can see its warhead is only 11 kilograms, and it uses fragmentation kill technology to reduce costs. If it were designed for direct impact hit to kill, the missile cost would be higher. Israel developed this missile mainly to counter various makeshift rockets from Hamas and Hezbollah, or specifically 122mm rockets. Also, including Israel's own official website advertisement states that the Iron Dome system mainly intercepts rockets within a range of 70 kilometers. If it exceeds 70 kilometers, the Iron Dome system cannot cope. We see this missile's Mach number is not very high, only Mach 2.2. Its in-flight maneuverability is actually achieved through the 4 canard fins on its warhead. From what we see here, Israel's air defense system is actually divided into 4 layers. The data written here, like 1,500 miles and 186 miles, are not the ranges of the air defense missiles themselves, but the ranges of the enemy weapons they can intercept. Because rockets, although somewhat different from ballistic missiles, as they don't take off vertically, their principles are similar. Upon launch, the rocket motor burns all its fuel, propelling it like an artillery shell. Of course, modern ballistic missiles have improved aerodynamic shapes in their warheads, allowing them to perform maneuvers and change trajectory. Older ballistic missiles actually follow a fixed trajectory. Here we also see that Israel's Iron Dome mainly intercepts targets with a range of about 62 miles. The next layer up is Israel's David Sling. We see that Israel did not purchase the US Patriot 3, but actually when Israel wants to buy US weapons, the US basically provides military aid, so Israel hardly needs to pay out of pocket. Moreover, even Israel's existing anti-missile missiles are actually jointly developed with US assistance. Whether it's the Iron Dome, David Sling, or the Aero Missile Defense System, they all actually rely on US technical assistance. Therefore, the capability of Israel's David Sling is actually slightly stronger than the Patriot 3. Furthermore, David Sling uses an infrared imaging seeker, giving it higher accuracy. Now, let's look again at Israel's Iron Dome. When Israel showcases its battle results, what level of rockets are they displaying? The quality of those rockets themselves is not high. Even if the opponent uses something like Grad, BM-21, 122mm rockets, constrained by the specific impulse of their rocket motors, their maximum speed is not very high, only around Mach 2+. And we can see that the rockets capable of reaching Israel, which are the main targets Iron Dome intercepts, come mainly from Hamas and Hezbollah. These two places are very close to Israeli territory. So there's a very interesting picture we see here. We see this rocket, whether from Hamas or Hezbollah, is still in its ascent phase when Israel's Iron Dome system is already launched, and it climbs to a considerable altitude. A very important reason is that Israel's land area is small, and the opponents using rockets against its territory are also very close. Therefore, Israel's radar systems can be deployed relatively close to the opponent, allowing its radar to actually detect the ascent phase of the enemy's rockets. Moreover, Hamas's simple rockets are not maneuverable. So, because Israel can detect the ascent phase, it differs from traditional terminal phase missile defense, which typically launches interceptors during the target's descent phase because launching too early is pointless. It is precisely because of the short distance between Israel and its opponents that the Iron Dome can launch during the enemy rocket's ascent phase. This is a major advantage due to the proximity. Even so, the Iron Dome's capability is actually quite limited, because we saw that during Hamas's Al-Aqsa flood operation, when they fired a somewhat larger number of rockets, Israel's Iron Dome actually couldn't intercept them all. The Iron Dome actually intercepts mainly 122mm rockets or such makeshift rockets. These rockets themselves have relatively low speeds, so their casings don't need to be very thick, as the frictional heat in the atmosphere won't be too high. The maximum speed of a 122mm rocket is only around Mach 2+. So in this case, it doesn't even need to break the thermal barrier. But our country's 300mm and 370mm long-range rocket artillery have ranges far exceeding 122mm rockets, so their speeds are higher, all exceeding Mach 3, with many like the 370mm rockets even exceeding Mach 6. In this case, the surface temperature of these rockets is very high. Long-range rocket artillery is a relatively inexpensive weapon. Its casing isn't made of particularly advanced materials. It's basically steel tubing, perhaps with some special additives, so its shell is relatively thick. Due to the geography of the Taiwan Strait, if the Iron Dome were used to intercept our long-range rockets, it could only engage them in their descent phase. Intercepting the ascent phase would be impossible. The descent phase is actually an accelerating phase for the long-range rocket. Moreover, the long-range rocket's casing is relatively thick. Therefore, the Iron Dome's warhead likely cannot destroy the warhead of the long-range rocket and may not even be able to alter its trajectory. Generally, the longer the range of rocket artillery, the higher its terminal velocity. So, not to mention, saturation attacks with our long-range rockets, even sporadic strikes would be problematic for the Iron Dome system. Because the speed is much higher than 122mm rockets, the Iron Dome system simply cannot calculate the intercept point for our 300mm rockets. Therefore, using Iron Dome to intercept 300mm rockets is basically a pipe dream. We wouldn't even need saturation attacks. There's another expert on the island, Zhuge Fengyun, who also thinks the Iron Dome is useless. In this regard, he is relatively more objective compared to RJ. He has done more homework than RJ, who is quite ignorant about military matters. But I suspect he can't understand our rocket artillery's product brochures for export. He said not to worry about long-range rockets, only ballistic missiles are a concern. He said if the guidance relies solely on Beidou, actually, in our export brochures for long-range rockets to Middle Eastern countries, it's written, Beidou system, GPS system plus INS guidance system. I suspect he doesn't understand what an INS navigation system is. The INS system is an inertial navigation system. For example, the early PHL-03 300mm rocket artillery used simple inertial navigation. But with mass production of navigation equipment driving prices down, the current 300mm and 370mm rocket artillery no longer use that simple inertial navigation. The inertial navigation systems they use now are much more accurate than before. So even without using Beidou, for ranges of 100 to 200 kilometers, their accuracy can be around 30 meters CEP. Moreover, the warheads of the 300mm and 370mm rockets are much larger than the 122mm warhead. A 122mm warhead is only about 10 to 20 kilograms, while our 300mm and 370mm rocket warheads are over 150 kilograms. In recent years, we've added battlefield reconnaissance UAVs that can be launched from the same launch tubes as the long-range rockets. These UAVs can loiter over the battlefield for a considerable time. So, for our new generation of long-range rockets, the terminal guidance options for the warheads are actually much more diverse. For export, there are versions with radar terminal guidance. Our domestic versions also have image-based guidance and laser guidance. This relies on the UAVs that can loiter on the battlefield. And for people on the island, anything American is considered superior. They think US military GPS signals cannot be jammed, but Beidou is easy to jam. Well, I think they should try jamming Beidou first. So this is about our long-range rockets. At the 2015 Volts Day Parade, we also displayed short-range ballistic missiles that share launchers with the long-range rockets. This ballistic missile, from its appearance, seems similar to the Iskander, but in reality, its penetration capability is much stronger than the Iskander's. Its biggest feature is that this ballistic missile is controllable throughout its entire flight. How exactly it achieves full flight control, I didn't dare to ask for details at the time. Trying to intercept this kind of ballistic missile with Iron Dome is basically delusional. Even if the Iron Dome could hit our short-range ballistic missile, it would be completely unable to alter its trajectory. According to Zhuge Fengyun's idea, the future island defense would have a 3-layer anti-missile system. The nearest layer is NASAMS, the middle layer is Patriot 3, and the final layer is Skybo 4, Tiancong 4. They on the island boast every day that the Skybow 4 introduced technology from Israel's Arrow 2 missile system. We've talked about this before. First, its system layout is quite different from the Arrow 2. Apart from both using two-stage rockets like the Arrow 2, their missile maneuverability is actually far apart. Even considering the Arrow 2, it only intercepts ballistic missiles with a range of about 300 kilometers, and it intercepts old Scud missiles, which it doesn't do very well. The Skybow 4 or Chang'e developed by Taiwan actually has worse performance than the Arrow 2. What can it intercept? I really don't know. For ballistic missiles, Arrow 2 intercepts 300 kilometers range missiles. Our co-launch ballistic missile has a range exceeding 500 kilometers. It has little inherent capability to intercept a 500 kilometers range ballistic missile. Even if we use a traditional trajectory, it still has little ability to intercept. We also see that the Skybow 4 Chang'e missile itself is quite large. Therefore, its minimum engagement altitude is not low. Taiwan hasn't published its minimum altitude. I personally estimate its minimum engagement altitude is at 20,000 meters, or even over 30,000 meters. In this case, because its minimum altitude is too high, attempting to intercept rockets is also hopeless. As for NASAMS, although its missile performance is good, it can now be equipped with the Advanced Sea Sparrow and a ground-launched version of the AIM-120 air-to-air missile. However, neither Advanced Sea Sparrow nor the AIM-120 Fangkondan are capable of intercepting ballistic missiles, because these missiles were not designed to hit ballistic missiles. They were originally intended for aerodynamic targets. They also use proximity fuses, which are very ineffective against ballistic missiles. Moreover, the AIM-120 or Advanced Sea Sparrow were not designed initially to intercept rockets with ranges exceeding 150 kilometers. Forget about accuracy. Just the ability of their warheads to alter the target's trajectory is highly questionable. Therefore, of the island's so-called short, medium, and long-range air defense systems, the only somewhat useful one is the Patriot 3. In fact, from the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we've seen the Patriot 3 struggle to intercept Iskander missiles. The trajectory variation of our Army's ballistic missiles in flight is much greater than the Iskanders. So, relying on Patriot 3 to intercept our Army's ballistic missiles is actually very difficult. The Patriot 3's greatest value is that its interception rate against targets like 300mm and 370mm rockets might be acceptable. But the biggest problem, we previously complained that 300mm and 370mm rockets were too expensive. Firing one was like launching a BMW 7 Series. However, in recent years, with price reductions in rocket motors, electronic equipment, and navigation systems in our country, the cost of 300mm and 370mm rockets has decreased significantly. Even if it costs a BMW 7 Series, firing a Patriot 3 isn't just a BMW 7 Series anymore. A single US Patriot 3 missile costs over $3 million USD. And normally, to intercept rockets, according to Yu Baichen's theory of 2 shots to intercept one target, it basically means firing 3 missiles to intercept one. Even conservatively, it's basically 2 missiles to intercept one. Whether the island can afford this becomes very questionable. Although the island has 9 Patriot batteries, the target channel capacity of a single Patriot battery is actually quite limited, because the US originally developed the Patriot not to intercept Soviet ballistic missiles in large numbers. It was meant for limited salvos from countries like Iraq or Iran, with dozens of missiles at most, which it could barely handle. Basically, a single Patriot battery has an engagement channel limit of about 9 targets. The only missile on the island truly capable of intercepting rockets is actually the Patriot 3. Others are very ineffective, including things like Skybow or Patriot 2. Intercepting our 370mm rockets is actually very difficult. Furthermore, whether it's long-range rockets or ballistic missiles striking Taiwan, as discussed in professional circles, our country's current missile strikes are accompanied by Air Force support for the missile groups. Whether it's anti-radiation or electronic interference, it would greatly degrade the enemy's detection and tracking capabilities. Taiwan is very close to our mainland. Once its air defense sites launch missiles, they can easily be located by long-endurance UAVs flying along the Fujian coast. Therefore, basically, after its air defense missiles fire one salvo, those air defense systems would likely be destroyed, meaning they might have a chance to fire the first shot, but not a second one.